Well, the EU Commission policy is that the Ubers of the world should not be stopped or restricted with disproportionate burdens. Earlier today, I spoke to the woman who runs Uber in the UK and several other European countries, Jo Bertram. First question, what was her reaction to the Commission policy?
It's great to see that the European Commission is looking forward and embracing the collaborative economy and starting to issue some guidelines on this area. It's obviously something that's happening not only in transportation but in many other sectors, and great to see the Commission embrace that.
And of course there is a concern that there are just going to be too many people touting for passenger hire on the roads of London. So is it your position that you will limit the number, or will you just let the numbers grow? If the drivers are there to do it, you'll just let them sign on to your app and be driver?
Oh, we want to make sure that the opportunity to earn money at the touch of a button continues to be there for drivers. And obviously, if there were too many drivers compared to the number of people wanting to use the app, then they wouldn't be able to earn enough money. There was some interesting research just done by INRIX actually about congestion in London, where they found that actually the numbers of car vehicles going in and out of the congestion charge, but also central London, hasn't actually changed over recent years. So it suggests that if anything, the growth of companies like Uber is replacing people who would have otherwise took their private car into the capital.
Okay. Let me ask you this, do you know how many of your drivers earn less than minimum wage per hour?
It's probably not a good comparison, because essentially all of the drivers are free to use the platform whenever they want, as much or as little as they want, and on a completely non-exclusive basis. So most drivers work part-time. They also combine this with starting their own business or other sources of income or other family commitments. And they may use their vehicle that they use for Uber, with other operators as well.
But it's not difficult to find Uber drivers who say they are earning less than the minimum wage per hour. Does that surprise you?
I know there are a few that say that. It obviously depends a lot where and when they work. What we find is, on average, the drivers working in London take home, after the service fee, £15 or £16 an hour.
After all their costs?
After the service
fuel,
fee. Now,
just after your service fee?
Yes, after the service fee.
And what are they taking home after their costs?
Well, it depends hugely on their costs.
But you must know the answer to that. You must have researched it to know what the drivers are getting.
We have, but again, for example, if you own your car and you're using that to work with us and another private hire operator.
Just the average that the drivers are earning after the costs, the reasonable costs have been deducted, after what they pay you. Do you know the answer?
We
know
the answer, but it's probably not a mean. I mean, for example, if you own your own car and you work 30 or 40 hours a week, there's, you could well be taking home much more than someone who is renting their car and is only, working a few hours a week.
Well, let's take someone who owns the car. You said you know the answer. I mean, what are they roughly getting per hour that they're working on Uber? I mean, it's a data business.
Yes, yeah.
It's a computer business.
It depends how many hours a week they work. So they pay their fixed costs over the month and their insurance.
And let's suppose they're doing a 40-hour week. Is that?
They could easily be taking home £9 or £10 an hour.
And what proportion of them could be taking home less than £6 an hour?
We don't know the details of exactly how many drivers rent and how many hours they work. Unfortunately, because of the way the private hire regime works in the UK, is you do probably need to work a certain number of hours a week.
If you get to 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 drivers on the streets, one would expect that the rates each driver's getting will go down.
Well, only if the demand doesn't rise in a similar way. 30,000 riders are downloading and using the app for the first time every week in London. The demand for the services has been huge. And we're actually hearing, we've done some polling of drivers recently, and the results were amazingly positive. And the biggest thing that was coming out from that was the drivers really valuing that complete flexibility. Most drivers coming to us from other operators tell us that they moved because they don't want to have set shifts and set hours, and they want to be able to take holiday and switch off when they can. They can literally now get work at the touch of a button.
Can I ask, because you are a data-driven business, do you know how many of your drivers are working more than 60 hours a week?
I don't have those numbers, but on average, the drivers use the app about 28 hours a week.
On average, it's 28. I saw that, but this is one of those ones where I don't mind whether they're working 28. I don't mind if they're working 40. I don't really mind if they're working 45. I don't want to get in a car where the driver's working 70 or 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
Can you tell whether they're working 70 or 80
Yeah, we
hours?
can see.
Do you stop them working 70
We make sure that we monitor the hours that drivers are working and that we notify them if they're working excessive hours.
Do you stop them though if they're working 70 or 80 hours?
Well, it's quite difficult to know. I mean, if they're logged onto the app versus if they're taking trips and things like that. But what we also have is after
tell
every.
If they're driving and.
I mean, we can tell when they're logged on, but they might also just be logged on at home. But I mean, what we can have is after.
But you can't. I think you can tell when they're driving, can't you? I mean, you can see the car.
You can see if they're doing trips. But what we find is that after every single trip, we have the customer rating the driver, so we get that real-time feedback that no other companies have to see how the driver's performing.
But I don't know whether my driver has driven 80 hours that week when I take an Uber. I can't tell whether he's driven 80 hours. I can tell you that he hasn't crashed while I've been in the car, but I would hold you to a higher standard than that.
Of course, and you will even
I would expect,
us.
I would expect you to know that the driver hasn't driven 80 hours because you know when the driver's driving. That's one of the great things about your app. Now, I'm surprised that you don't know or you don't tell the driver, get out the car because you've been driven 80 hours this week.
Well, exactly. So we monitor the hours that the drivers works and notify them and make sure that they're not working excessive hours.
You notify them or you instruct them or you just log them off if they've done 80 hours, say.
We notify them and we actually talk with them and look through their driving behaviours and if there's any safety concerns and things like that. But essentially, all those drivers are independent business people who are running their own business and combining it with many other things as well.
Do you think the scale of the disruption that Uber is causing rightly causes people to say, let's have a think about how this is working? This isn't some Joe's minicab office. This is a company with 30,000 people at its fingertips. I mean, what do you think about the sniping?
I believe that competition is good. It's good for consumers, and I think we've all seen that. I mean, 3-4 years ago, you couldn't have got a car within 3 minutes anywhere in London and many of the other cities in the UK. I think the one thing that worries me is, I think in some of this, that the drivers' stories are not being heard. Because, I mean, genuinely, every time I get in a car, I talk to the drivers, and the stories of how they've used Uber to change their lives are really inspiring, and it's something they really value and appreciate. And I think we want to find a way to tell also those positive stories, not just the handful of drivers that are unhappy.
Jo Bertram, thank you very much. Thanks.